how you show up is like how the rest of your team shows up. And if you're even off a little bit, like the whole team will just kind of shift. And that's honestly been like such a big challenge, especially with a new team. It's like the more people you come in, you really need to manage the expectation and like the standards being indoctrinated to them in week one. Like day one, week one, they got to be on the same page, or like they're going to either leave on their own in a week, or like you'll fire them in a week, because it's like they just don't get it. And if they start out that wrong way, it makes it really challenging as a leader.
This is the Staying Power Podcast, a show that explores the challenges business owners face as they grow. I'm Brandon Hall.
And I'm Thomas Castelli.
And together, we ask the tough questions to show you that running a business is not for the faint of heart. But if you have staying power, you'll overcome your challenges and achieve lasting success.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Staying Power Podcast. Brandon Hall and Thomas Castelli are joined here with Blake Wyatt, Facebook and YouTube ad specialist and leader at Sales Mentor, a traffic and funnels company. Today, we discuss the challenges new leaders face when first leading a team, the difference between the visionary and integrator role in a company, Facebook and YouTube ads, and much more.
Blake, thanks so much for taking the time to come on the show today. Would you be able to give our listeners a little information on your background?
Yes, sir. So I've been a media buyer for the most part, like primarily on Facebook for the last 3 years. And as of December 2019, I was made the profit manager of the Sales Mentor company, and now kind of working with Taylor Welsh and Chris Evans on their EW publishing company, and starting to partner with new businesses now and grow and scale those. So it's been a bit of a wild ride, and 2020 has been challenging for all of us, I know. So should be interesting today.
So before we kind of just dive into everything, would you just be able to give us a little bit of an overview of what a media buyer does?
Yeah, so media buyer in the traditional sense could be somebody that's, buying, billboard ads or newspaper ads or whatever. But in my case, what I'm referring to is digital media buying, where essentially you're buying ads to run on Facebook or Google or YouTube ads. Could be, Twitter ads, Snapchat ads, all that stuff.
Gotcha. So could you guys take us through, your experience at Sales Mentor, how you got involved in that, and how you knew it was the right time to dive into that type of business?
Yeah, I guess I was kind of reaching I don't want to call it a peak, because I don't think a human being can ever peak necessarily at anything as long as they keep that growth mindset oriented in the right direction. But, for me, the media buying side of things was getting a little bit too easy. And I don't say that like a braggadocious sense. It's just like I was just ready for a new challenge. So as soon as, Taylor and Chris gave me the opportunity to basically take the helm of this business and run with it, where in January it was just like a simple low 5 figures, not even a 6-figure month business, now to, only 7 months later, and now hitting like 7-figure months is pretty substantial. So, I myself knew that it was the right time because I was ready for a new challenge, but at the same time, I knew the opportunity in front of me to like kind of, be able to grow into the person that's deserving of that type of leadership. And it's definitely not something that comes lightly or that's earned easily. And anybody that's running their own company or at the helm or like a C-level executive of any company, I think can relate to that.
So leadership being one of the big pillars of being able to take the type of position, what would you say your biggest strengths are with leadership, and what is it exactly about your leadership skills that puts you in the position to be able to run a company at that level?
To be honest with you, I think the majority of it comes from, the marketing background that I had. And, I was kind of like one of the key directors at a previous company that was doing about like 1.7, 1.8 million a month before I left. And there's a lot of things that you learn getting to that point. But as far as leadership goes, I've always had like a natural forte with dealing with people like of different uniqueness. Because I think that as leaders, sometimes we can get really pigeonholed into one type of style for everybody. And the problem with that I've seen observing, previous companies before and stuff like that, is that they'll use the same method on everybody. But I think that one thing that I think that is definitely a strong suit for myself is being able to understand each individual person and actually taking the time to read other people's like Myers-Briggs profiles, their Enneagrams, and being like, oh, you know what? Like that's how that person functions. So if they're doing something I want to improve with them, I should approach it in a different way than I would this person. And that can definitely go a long, long way. The biggest challenge I've had, though, for sure, has been like the vision aspect of it, because I'm like a super tangible person. I like to solve problems that are presented to me. But when you're like, hey, Blake, like look out like 3-5 years ahead and what do you see? I'm just like, wow, that's such like an obstacle for me, or has been this year, in developing that skill, because I like what's in the here and now. And it's always kind of difficult to paint that vision and trust that that's where you will go.
Have you read the book Traction?
I have. It's a great book.
Yeah, because they talk about the visionary integrator thing, and it seems like that's actually what you're sort of tapping into there, where you like here are the problems, how do we solve them, the here and now, but the thinking about the long-term vision is tough. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're bad at it. It's just tough. And when I hear the word tough, right, or just an obstacle, what I hear is it zaps my energy. And I'm a big proponent of putting people in places they want to be so they can perform the best. And that typically, not to get too mushy-gushy, but that typically has to do with energy. And so for me, I love the big picture. I love the 5 to 10 years. My wife will tell you that I live in the future. I just, everything about it. I've got the vision in my mind. I can see it so perfectly clearly. But what I need is the help of somebody that can take the problems that I'm presenting them with, because I'll say, hey, in 3 years, I want to be here. So XYZ needs to happen. How do we do that? And that's where that integrator person comes in and says, oh, I can take this and run with this. I know how to solve that problem now that you presented it to me. Or, hey, of these 5 ideas, only one is actually viable right now. The other 4 are too crazy. But we can tackle the one now, and I know how to execute that. Have you thought about that at all? Like, have you thought about maybe you need a visionary on your team?
That's so funny that you bring that up, because now that you describe that, and like I learned about that pretty heavily last year, like in 2019 when I read that book, and we actually had like an EOS consultant on our team that was like instilling all that stuff for us. And it's so interesting that you say that, because I now realize that I've basically been the integrator for Taylor and Chris. Like Chris is such a strong visionary that just like you, as you know from talking to him too, it's like he's always thinking about the future, like 5-10 years out. And it's almost like he's like frustrated. Like, how do you not see this? How do you not see what I see? But I would say I'm definitely functioning or like better suited to be an integrator over the visionary. But I'm being like trained to like flex that visionary muscle,
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to know how to play both sides. I think it's also important to know where you are really strong. And I think in some of the conversations that I've had in the past with other business owners and people that are executives in businesses, sometimes people go, oh, well, it's the integrator, second in command. But I'm like, no, but trust me, like I can't run my business without an integrator, because I'm just sitting in the future, literally all day long, just twiddling my thumbs going, this is how we're going to do it. I can map it all out, but I can't execute it nearly as well as somebody that can say, let me take this and understand how to apply this to today's business and then go and execute. That's an incredibly valuable skill. But yeah, it's funny. I'm sure that my team would probably say the same thing, where I get frustrated because I feel like we are too slow. We're probably one of the fastest growing CPA firms in the United States, and I think that we're growing too slow. So I'm just like, I've already got it mapped out, guys. You don't even have to think about it. You just have to execute. But that's the hard part. Execution is the really tough part.
Yeah, just jump in there. Say, there's a quote from Wall Street, one of my favorite quotes, and it goes, the quote is, "Good things sometimes take time." And I kind of fall. I don't know exactly where I stand in that big spectrum, but I will say this: that like it does take patience to implement a big vision. That's just the key. And most people who are the visionaries, from my experience, are very impatient people. So it's, and I'm not saying that in any, negative or positive way. It just is the facts.
That's what I heard.
No, but I mean, and look, I am in many ways, I see the vision sometimes too for certain things. And I'm like, I just want it today. And some people, my dad told me one time, this is what he told me. He goes, Tom, you're living in fantasy land. And I'm like, Dad, no, I'm going to go buy this property, but anyway, back.
But you think Elon Musk is living in a fantasy land when he says we're going to go colonize Mars? I bet you 5 years ago people were like, you're nuts. Now people are going, yeah, you're probably not so nuts, Because
people are saying, go sign me up.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. People are signing up for it. But I think that's the importance though, is like you have to have somebody that's going to be able to clearly tell you where we're going and how to roughly get there. But you also need somebody that's going to be able to digest that and say, and here's what we need to do today to make our incremental progress. But anyway, good conversation, Blake. Sorry to take us off the rail.
It's so funny because like literally last week, Chris told me on a one-on-one call, he's like, Blake, I feel like a lion, like just like a tiger in the cage right now. And I'm like dying to get out. Like, just let me acquire more companies, let me partnership, like, let me do other things. But he's like, but I feel like I'm like just still locked up in the cage. But it's because we're fixing so many things and improving so many things. Because like the business grew over 1,000% like year to date versus last year. And it's like, that doesn't come without like its own challenges and new obstacles. And it's easy to, like when you're at a really small scale, it's really easy to think that everything is all right. But the more fuel you put behind something, the more like that you notice, like you're like, oh, all of a sudden you start getting holes poked in everything that you have in the foundation. Because if it's not really, really strong, it's just going to start like falling apart. And you're like, damn, I got to like patch this up. I got to fix that. I got to fix this before we go to a next level.
We're right in the thick of that right now at our firm. I think that we do a lot of things right. I think that we probably do a lot of things better than most CPA firms do, but we've made a transition from this like micro CPA firm to a small CPA firm. You know, we've gone from 8 to 17 employees in a matter of a year and a half. And for a CPA firm, that's really fast.
Yeah.
And with that comes a lot of things that break. Now, those things were always breaking. They were always going to break, but now it's just much more pronounced because now we're trying to add more clients to it. And we realize, oh, crap, we can't add another 50 clients to this process. Otherwise, it's just going to blow up in our face. We have to fix it now. But that's interesting. Yeah. And I was actually going to tell you, you should tell Chris, like, hey, why don't you take a vacation, take some time off? But then I was thinking, no, that's bad advice because every time that I take time off, I'm just sitting there thinking about the vision. I literally come back and I'm like, we're going 100 times more faster.
Blake, from your experience, as an organization grows, I don't know, maybe you've seen this, but like how much harder is it to actually get people to move on the same wavelength? Like when you have a group of like 5 people, right? It's a lot easier to get 5 people to implement change with 5 people. But once you have 20 people, for example, getting all 20 people to move in the same coordinating way is a lot more difficult.
Yeah, I would say that like we started out in January with 3 of us, and then we took it like accelerated growth like crazy. And then we got to about like 5 to 6 people, still fine, no issues, right? As soon as we got to like 8 marketing people plus like a 5 or 6 person sales team now, and now we're developing like a client success department, and support has grown from 2 people to 5 or 6 people now. All of a sudden, it's the way I would describe it is like everybody, when you bring everybody in really quickly, everybody's on like the same track, but they're going at like a different pace. And I think it's the pace that really messes people up or trips them up, because if they're not going at the same pace, even if you're in the same lane together, you're all shooting towards the same thing. It's like sails versus paddles, right? It's like you can paddle your way and just like freaking just gun it and grit your teeth and go and go and go. But if you're all if you're all putting your oars in the water at different times, it's just going to mess up the synergy. And being is it called a coxswain? I don't remember what it's called. Is that right? The right term for like rowing or whatever? It's like the person that sits at the front of the boat or the back. I can't remember. And they yell stroke, stroke. It's like to get them to just stroke and sink is incredibly difficult at first, but the more momentum you get with that, then the more you can, take them out of that and kind of get sales set up where you just lift them up to the wind and let it take you, right? But it's definitely some time and a lot of teamwork and coordination, communication, making sure communicating between departments is probably like the second biggest thing I would say.
What have you found to be an effective solution to the communication issues? Like, is there certain types of technology used? Is there a certain type of like communication standardization that can help people move in a more coordinated manner?
Yeah. So actually one tool that I've been messing around with lately as the team has grown is called Geekbot. It's like an integration with Slack that you can actually put like stand-ups or like automated prompting your team to give, so for example, every morning at 9 a.m. EST, it sends a message to everybody on my team in the main channel and says, like, what are your top 3 priorities today? Like, what's your energy level 1 to 10? And do you have any barriers, or like, do you need any help with anything? So that I, as a leader, can quickly just jump into Slack without jumping on a call or having to ask them individually every day. I can see what they're working on. If they need help with something, I can just reply right in the thread and just say, hey man, like just let me know like what time this is, and I can jump on that call with you and make sure that project goes forward or whatever. Something else that's really helped us also in Slack is to actually have an update channel. And anytime that an update is made, the leader from each respective department will post that in there, and all of the other leaders of the other departments are in there. So it's, and then every Friday we kind of have like an expected update where it's like every single Friday at XYZ time, any department leader in that channel will update the group on any respective changes, whether there's like price changes to products that we've had, fulfillment changes that we've had to like the service side of the business itself. Like if somebody does buy a consulting or a coaching package from us, you know, if we've increased it, like we just increased it from 7 weeks of fulfillment to 10. It's like, if you don't tell the sales guys that, then they're going to tell everybody it's 7 weeks, and then they jump in and it's 10 weeks, and then it's a big mess. It's like, you need to make sure that sales, marketing, and client success, everybody, support, administration, making sure everybody's on the same page. And that's some of the stuff that we've done lately to help with that.
That's a very interesting tool right there, because we've heard, we've had other people come on the podcast here and talk about, the daily stand-ups, and, they'll have a phone call where the first 17 minutes of the day, they'll run through everybody's list, kind of exactly what you just said, but it's a phone call. And it sounds like you're kind of, in a way, automating this so that you're just getting, everybody who's on your team essentially, or on teams below you, to post their problems, their issues of the day, if you will. And you kind of dive into the specific issues you need without having to set up a call to do it.
Yeah, we still do have those calls. And, don't get me wrong, we do stand-ups Monday, Wednesday, Friday for marketing, and then sales guys do it every single day. But it's like, that way I know going into the stand-up already, like what they're working on that day. Or we also have weekly projections. So I already have that all documented, so that when we're on the stand-up, like I've got all their faces on the left, all their projections on the right, so that they don't have to go into minute detail of what their targets are. I'm looking at it already, and they can just say, number 1, on track, number 2, off track, number 3, on track. And then I can just focus on helping them and asking them, do you have any questions or comments or concerns? And then that's handled there. The other best thing I've done this year to date, to be honest, is having a weekly brainstorm session where you literally invite everybody from your company. And we do this on Fridays after the Friday morning stand-up. And then either the leader can bring a topic of the week every time, and usually we like to tackle like risks that are currently facing the company or the product, services, and stuff like that right now. Or if there's nothing designated from the leader, everybody else is kind of invited to bring their own ideas or like their own thing that they might need help with, that we can have completely fresh, kind of like almost like a writer's room where it's just kind of a little bit laid back. And, for example, you could be like, hey, you know what? How can we reduce the refund rates on our like front end product or something, right? And it's amazing the answers that you come up with, and the stuff that the team comes up with collaboratively together is so much more powerful than if you tried to do that all yourself and figure it out all yourself. So that's been huge, and it's also really big for morale for the team.
That is awesome. We actually used to do Friday brainstorming sessions, and then we sort of like moved into, as we scaled out, moved into like the first 20 minutes or so was like firm-wide updates, financial health, team check-ins, like each team that we have, what are they focused on? And the remaining 40 minutes, we still do something like that. Some sort of like problem solving. And ours has gotten pretty interesting, relatively comprehensive in the sense that there's always something that somebody's going to bring to the table to walk through or educate people on or something like that. So something similar, but it works really well. And one of the big things that it does for us is it just creates a rhythm. Now we're virtual, so that is super important in a virtual environment, is to create a constant check-in that everybody can always count on occurring. So that's one of the big benefits that we've had. Now, I did start looking up Geekbot, and I already signed up, and we're integrating it with Slack as we speak. And this is awesome. This looks awesome. I will say, Blake, it looks very integrator of you. That's what I will say.
That's what I do. Like in my Gallup, one of my top 3 strengths in Gallup is problem solving. So that's like literally what I'm designed to do. But
that's great.
But yeah, you'll love that tool for sure.
Well, so let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the digital media buying. When should you use like Facebook versus LinkedIn versus Instagram versus Twitter? Like if I'm coming to you and I'm saying, okay, I want to find high net income clients and I've got a budget of whatever and I'm a boring CPA, what platform should I use to find these high net income clients?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that the number one way to know where you're going to go is just ask yourself, where is my favorite best market? Like where are my people? Where are my people? Right? Because if you are like primarily going B2B, Facebook might not be the place for you. It doesn't mean that it doesn't work, but if you're going to have like every business, in my opinion, from a media buying perspective, should have one core pillar of traffic. You ultimately want to diversify that as you grow and scale to hedge against any risk of, let's say that you're on Facebook and you're scaling up like crazy, and then Facebook just decides to like ban your account. All of a sudden, all your leads are drying up and you don't know what to do and you didn't have a backup plan. It's super high risk. Whereas for the first, 3 to 6 months, scaling your business up on Facebook is great. But it's like once you get that to a really good point, you should start dabbling in other things like Google ads or, Twitter, whatever. Like right now, our core pillar of like what we're doing is YouTube ads. But over the last few months, we've built out onto Snapchat, Taboola. We're running on Facebook also now too, as well as we have messed around with LinkedIn, not to much success because like we kind of realized again, like it's like we tried it, but our market's not really there, but for a CPA company, B2B company, that's where I would go for LinkedIn. And while Facebook can kind of be like a mixed bag of tricks where you can almost find anybody on there because almost everybody is on there, it's much more geared towards B2C type companies. And if you're helping individual people and stuff like that.
I feel like, when it comes to media buying, a lot of like novices and people who are not experienced with Facebook advertising or YouTube advertising, what have you, it just looks like a big hairy mess. Like it has a lot of ambiguity to it. There's a lot of complexity. What are your biggest tips to actually being effective in advertising on these platforms?
I would say the best thing you can always do is play towards the platform. I guess, at the timing of this specific podcast episode, it's great because Facebook's actually been building and improving the AI for the last, whatever it's been, like 10 plus years of having Facebook ads available, to the point where now they're actually kind of moving away from having people, ninja hack their way to success on Facebook. They just want everybody to be clear and follow their compliance policies and stuff like that. But, to be honest, any of these platforms, it's actually not that complicated. And most people think about things backwards. So I'll kind of like readjust the thinking around this, where instead of thinking, how can I best work the ads to make my product, service, or business sell or work on this platform, it's a much better question to ask, how can I make such an amazing product, service, or business opportunity or whatever for somebody else that the product basically sells itself, and that even if I just push go on some ads and I don't even know what I'm doing, the market that I'm gearing it towards is going to eat it up. Because most people, they're so focused on like the ads and they're like, hey, you know what? If I just market what I have, because we have this false perception of our thing is so exciting to us that we think that everybody's excited about it, but that's not the case. Like I can tell you right now, I'm not very excited about CPA. You know what I mean? Like it's like, that's not like this crazy exciting thing. So to be able to market yourself effectively, if you have that, like that really strong offer messaging, that it's like a no-brainer for people, then it doesn't necessarily matter where you put it. As long as the outcome for them is clear, you can be pretty successful on any platform. And if you don't know what you're doing, there's so many people out there that can help you find your way. And you don't have to start out that big. Like you can always start out with, even just spending like $20 a day on most of these platforms can get you some type of result that you can take and run with. Facebook has Facebook Blueprint, where it's completely free and you can learn the ins and outs of Facebook advertising. LinkedIn has their own courses about using their ad platforms as well, because let's be real, they want you to spend money. They want you to invest money into their ad platform. So they're trying to make it as easy as possible now for you to get on there. So if you're not on there, there's not that much of a barrier to entry. As long as you got a credit card, some ad copy, and possibly an aversion to shyness on camera, then you should be able to, make your own ads.
Kind of sounds like what you're saying is instead of focusing so much on trying to tweak this ad, you should have a compelling product or service, right? And be able to clearly communicate what the benefits of using that product or service is, and then know your market, and then get that ad in front of your target market. And because your service is so compelling and you're able to communicate that, the ad should, in theory, do well, just by using some of those basic tenets right there, basically those basic principles, rather than trying to focus so much on, is this specific ad really so good, and is that accurate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that's a pretty good way of translating that stuff that I basically just rambled on about.
Because for me, I'm just speaking from my own personal experience with Facebook ads. I go on, you see all those numbers, you see all the subcategories, you see all this stuff. It's just like, yo, it's like, this is tough right here. But I think the way you explained it is really getting down to the fundamentals of marketing and sticking to the fundamentals. And if you could do that right, the advertising becomes much easier.
100%.
Was there any particular challenges you faced along this journey that almost made you quit, that almost said, you know what, this is too much. This is too much for me. I want to just take a step back. I just want to be a media buyer. I don't want to lead a team anymore.
There's definitely been a lot of challenges along the way. I don't know if I would say that I was ready to quit necessarily, but one thing that has been like a crazy challenge for us was like basically getting and staying compliant on Facebook, and just like basically Facebook did spring cleaning and they just carpet banned like a whole bunch of accounts. And like we even like rewrote everything to be compliant, and they're still messing around with our stuff, and we've had compliance officers, all that kind of stuff. And another one has been the refund rate, which has been such a big challenge. But the biggest takeaway from these challenges has been thinking about, because I think it's really easy for, even as leaders, but us who are not vision oriented people, to kind of like think about the first order consequence, but not the second or third, where you're like, yep, this will get us to market, this will do X, this will do Y, this will do Z. But it's like, you don't think about, yeah, but what's that going to look like a month or 2 or 3 months from now? And like one thing, for example, is we actually set up like a certain type of payment plan that's like a 10 payment plan, where the attrition rate for almost any membership subscription service of any kind is like 3 months. It doesn't matter the industry, whatever, it almost always averages out to about 3 months. So the fact that we were kind of expecting people to stick around and be able to make their payments for 10 months, now that we're in like month 4, 5, 6 of selling that and selling a high volume of it, we're getting so many people that are like falling off the subscription, or they're getting rid of it or whatever. And it's like, there's not really a whole lot that you could do to fix that, because it's a second and third order consequence of not seeing that being an issue later on down the road when you originally launched that concept to market.
So I see what you're saying there. It's basically, the challenge is like, you can see the initial, like you do X and you see what the consequence in the immediate future is going to be. But there's like ramifications of each of those actions that spiral out from that. And it's just like difficult to foresee how, what those consequences are beforehand.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I could definitely see where that could be tough. But it's never been so much where you're like, you know what, I'm going to hang this up.
Yeah.
And real quick, what do you mean by Facebook spring cleaning? Can you go into that for us?
Well, so this is technically speculation, but I have it on really, really good authority that Facebook does the fall sweep and the spring cleaning, where essentially if you actually go back probably 2 months from now, or like 3 months from now, where it was kind of like getting into springtime, March, April-ish, all of a sudden, like you hear from everybody, like everybody's getting accounts like just shut down, like business managers shut down, ad accounts shut down, and they have no actual reason why. And then a bunch of people will appeal it, and then they get it approved. some of this speculation, and I hope that Zuckerberg is not listening to me when I say this, but some people think that it's because basically they're shutting down a bunch of accounts right before like the company's going through evaluation. And then it basically shows on the statistics that there's all these new advertisers because everybody that got banned is making all these new accounts. So it looks like there's a whole bunch of new advertisers, new companies joining the Facebook advertising platform. So it makes the company look better in their evaluation and stuff like that. So that's one thing. And then another thing is just the fact that like in the fall, they just like clean house because they change their policies quite frequently. And even just like a month ago, they seem to up the policies even more again. So it's always a matter of like staying ahead and being as like squeaky clean with compliance, following all the rules that you can to make sure that you don't end up with any hiccups in, you know, your lead flow, traffic, sales flow, whatever your business has.
Yeah, Facebook and all these companies, especially YouTube. I hear YouTube has a lot of those issues too recently, where they're just getting really clamping down and really making it difficult for their media creators, really at the end of the day, to advertise on the platform. At least that's what I'm hearing with the limited knowledge. But was there any other particular big challenges you faced along this path?
Another really big challenge is getting the team locked in on the vision. Like it's one thing to get the vision kind of like lined out, but to get the team to kind of like understand it, grasp it, and really, really kind of respect where they sit in the, like, I guess like the transcendence of that vision to like your finished product or service or whatever, you know, whatever your business has. Like it's a whole nother beast of a thing to be like, because let's say that you are the visionary and you know, it's so clear to you. That doesn't mean it's clear to everybody. And again, going back to like the sales versus paddles analogy, a team that is more locked in on like the vision of the company and more importantly, the vision that you have for them. So it's like, ask them what they want, find out what their personal vision is, tie it somehow to your company's progression and growth so that like they have an incentive for the company to do better. Because if they're dialed in on that, they're going to be so much more excited about their own work. They're not going to be thinking at their desk. They're not going to be like, why am I doing this? Like this is a waste of my time. They're going to be thinking like, this is like what I'm doing now, what I'm contributing to this company now is pushing me towards my personal goals by helping the company do X, Y, Z. And the other half of that is like getting everybody on the same page with standards, because it's so easy to let people kind of make their own standards. But the thing that I've noticed over the last like 6 months is how you show up is like how the rest of your team shows up. And if you're even off a little bit, like the whole team will just kind of shift. And that's honestly been like such a big challenge, especially with a new team. And like you guys would know this from hiring a bunch of people really quickly too, and growing really quickly. It's like the more people you come in, you really need to manage the expectation and like the standards being indoctrinated to them in week one. Like day one, week one, they got to be on the same page, or like they're going to either leave on their own in a week, or like you'll fire them in a week, because it's like they don't get it. And if they start out that wrong way, it makes it really challenging as a leader for the company.
Yeah, it's really easy to set someone on the right path from the beginning. It's really hard to redirect that path after the habits set in, which is of course really challenging. And yeah, I really like the thing you said about. I really do like that analogy, the paddle versus the sail, because one of the things I was reading recently was how you have to basically appeal to someone's own self-interest, right, and how everything benefits that person. And to your point, if you can align their own self-interest with the interest of the firm or the interest of the company, then they're just going to sail their way in the right direction. Meanwhile, if they don't see how what they're doing currently is going to help them and the company, then you have to keep kind of hitting them over the head, metaphorically, of course, like, hey, you got to do this, you got to do this, and it just becomes a bigger challenge.
Mm-hmm. It gets a little monotonous after a while, and you're like, why are you not getting this? But it's really critical to be clear as to like what the vision is, what your expectations are for them. And it's like, just work with them on what they need instead of focusing so much on like what you need, because you'll get what you want out of your team so much faster
if they understand how they're going to get what they want out of the relationship, like way ahead of time. Because then they're not questioning why am I doing this, or like, why did I bother spending an extra hour on this? It's like, because this is tied to my goal. And that it could be different for each member of the team. Obviously, if the company is like really big, like 50 plus people, you can't be as individualized. But if it's a smaller company, you can like 1000%, you can talk to somebody and say, hey, like, what's your vision for yourself? Have them hand like a one pager to you about like, what do they see themselves like what does their work look like? What does their family life look like? How much time do they spend in the different domains of their life, whether it's, relationships or fun or hobbies or, music, or who knows what people are interested in. And then once you know that, you can help them kind of refine KPIs, clear outcomes, and key results that they need to hit to unlock those rewards. And then as long as they're tied together, then everybody gets like so much more motivated. But it's definitely a process. It's something you have to work through with them. And my philosophy so far has been making them a part of it. So instead of me saying like, these are your KPIs, I've noticed that if I say, this is what I'm thinking for your KPIs, these 3 things, how do you feel about them? And do you feel like you could accurately report on them and you are in control of them? And sometimes they'll be like, actually, you know what? The 3rd thing doesn't really make any sense. Like, and I think that this is a better KPI. And sometimes they're right. But because they're involved in the process, when you say, okay, now you own this, you've worked with them on it, that they're like, I'm a part of this. I've like kind of committed myself to these KPIs instead of like, oh, my boss is just ragging on me about these freaking KPIs. You know what I mean? It's a very different like mental context that they have.
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of the stuff you're saying. I think we're going through a lot of the same challenges you're facing right now. So it's kind of eye-opening to know that, hey, look, it's not just it's not just me or not just us. I guess at the end of the day.
No, you guys are not alone at all.
Real quick comment on all that too. And I agree, like trying to get people to be part of that process. The beginning of this year, my goal was to add a lot of clarity to my organization. And that's kind of just my overarching goal probably forever, is just how do you inject more and more clarity into the organization so that everybody knows what's going on and what they're doing. So one of the things that I did was first I went to my system and I asked, what can my system give me easily information wise, like in terms of deadlines and tasks and emails and client experience and all that, because those can be at least a starting point for KPIs. I want to make it easy to track. I did go to my team and kind of get their feedback. But then at the end of the day, I was just like, here's what I want to measure, and rolled it out. What I realized a few months later was kind of exactly what you said. Some of the team had different KPIs, and those probably would have been better KPIs to track than the ones that I ultimately decided to go with. But the other thing that I realized too is what I built out, while it was a step in the right direction in terms of let's add more clarity, let's add something that people can count on and come back to and report on, I had built it out more so to identify poor performers quickly rather than building something out that uplifts my top performers. And it was a really interesting realization because I was kind of going through and I was like, man, all my top performers are getting 4 out of 4. But then even then, like there's some top performers that just they're top 1%. There's others that are top 5%, which is still amazing. But even if you have everybody at the very same score, you still know that there's variance there. So I was like, I don't have a system to support them and encourage them and motivate them to go even further, even more above and beyond. And I don't have a system to support their growth in their professional career. The system that I have now, while again helps, I think it was a good first step. It was that realization that, with the way that I wrote it was essentially, it's like I was implementing a punishment if you don't hit your KPIs, which the punishment was always there anyway. I was just kind of objectively saying, here's what's going to happen basically. And that was the clarity that I gave my team. So what does that really do? That doesn't help anybody that's never even going to be in that situation anyway, right? It just gives them another thing that they have to do. And it's just a pain point. And now it becomes a pain. Every quarter, I've got to go and fill this thing out. So now that's what I'm trying to do. I'm going back to the drawing board to figure out how do I modify that to not only accomplish the goal of, hey, if I've got somebody that's not performing, how do you identify that quickly and take care of it quickly? But at the same time, how do you create a system that really supports and motivates the top performers? And that's the primary objective, gives them clarity, because they're the 20% that's going to do 80%, right? how do you make sure your 20% are well taken care of?
Yeah. And I think that one thing that Taylor's done a lot with like both sales teams and marketing teams on our side is doing an end of day review from everybody. So like everybody's got an end of day report where they basically put what they accomplished that day, and then they rate their like basically, did I honor my calendar? 1 out of 10. Did I do everything I said I was going to do? 1 out of 10. And then a bunch of other questions basically, and then also like just your overall takeaway from the day, because it helps them to kind of like leave their work and disconnect and recharge better, because they're like, they can actually appreciate what they accomplished that day and reflect on it. But at the same time, as a leader, it also lets you see like lead indicators of like, is this person like, is their biology healthy? Or do they need coaching on how to time manage themselves or do whatever if like they're not hitting their calendar projections for the day? Or if they're you look at what they're working on, you're like, this is all the wrong stuff. This has nothing to do with what we're trying to achieve. You can course correct them so much easier knowing that you have that daily feedback from the team instead of just looking back, because you as a leader usually see stuff at a lag where it's like 2 weeks later, you're like, what the heck just happened? Like, why is this project not done? Well, they haven't been working on it for 2 weeks, right? So that's been helpful.
Just another thing that is in line with what we're seeing here. It's like I said, it's great. It's been a great episode so far. So, if you had to do anything over, in your career, was there anything that you would have done differently?
There's a laundry list. I'll send it to you. But yeah, I would say the number one thing that I would change or at least improve if I was to go back, even just, 4 to 6 months from now, it would be being more purposeful and intentional about my decision-making process and asking myself better questions before making decisions, but also making them sooner. Because like, in the grand scheme of things, if you are 5 days behind what you like could have hoped for, it's also like potentially down the line that could have actually bought you a few weeks of extra time towards the goals that you had set out for yourself for the quarter, for the year, whatever. And the other piece of that is thinking about what is the real like long-term consequence. Like I said, like the first, second, third order consequence thing is such a huge thing where anytime that the team's like, well, should we do this or should we do that? It's like, that's a golden opportunity for you to be like, what is the consequence of doing this now? And most of the time, human beings, whether it's like kinetically, like whether it's like physically, like if you go to like, this is kind of weird maybe, but to like push your couch across the room, like your body will use whatever muscles are easiest. Whenever you're doing your work, your brain will always default to what's easiest. Same thing in decision making. It's like, it might be harder for you to be like, you know what, we need to build out this product for another 2 weeks before we take it to market so that we don't face, backlash in a month or two from now, versus like, let's just launch it now and fix it later. Like that's a hard decision to make because everybody's like, well, it's already ready. Let's just put it to the market, or like, we've got this new service, let's just do it. And it's not to say that you should be slow or like you should not take things to market quickly. It's just to say that like you should actually stop and take a minute to think about what the actual second, third order consequence of that is in 3, 6, 12 months from now, because it might feel great month one, but then once those other consequences come around, you're like, damn, that was not worth it at all.
Gotta say, I dealt with a similar situation just today where I realized that. And like I said, you're dropping a lot of great knowledge here on this podcast. I think everybody who's listening should take note if you're out there on the podcast wavelengths. We're coming up on time today. If our listeners wanted to learn a little bit more about you and what you have going on, what's the best way for them to connect with you? Or
that is a super ironic question because I'm so busy building other people's companies and brands that I don't have much of one of my own. But if you want to check me out, it's at blake.wyatt89 on Instagram, and Facebook is just, Blake Wyatt. And there's a Superman photo of me that you can find. And that's pretty much it.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing that. You guys got that. We'll drop that in the show notes below for everybody who wants to connect and learn more about Blake. And I want to thank you again for taking the time to come to the show today. It was an
Thanks for having
episode.
me.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, leave us a review on iTunes and share the show with other business owners who may be facing their own growth challenges. And if you own a professional services firm, consider joining our private community. The Staying Power Collective is a community where owners of accounting, law, and consulting firms discuss best practices for running and growing virtual businesses. You'll get access to our Slack group, and you'll have a Zoom meeting once a month with a small group of other firm owners. To apply for the group, head on over to www.stayingpowercollective.com and fill out the brief form. And if you have suggestions for future topics or guests, or if you have general questions or feedback, send us an email at contact@stayingpowercollective.com. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great rest of your week.